welcome everybody to the STARS 3 webinar. We have with us our trusted advisor, as always, Sai Alba from PilieroMazza as our speaker. We also have with us Vice President of Delivery, Dr. Troy Tyre from ProposalHelper, who is going to be available to us to answer all those specific proposal and RFP related questions. So again, thank you all for joining this afternoon. Please continue to submit your questions in the Q&A box, and we'll get to that as quickly as we can at the end. I do want to open up with a welcome note to Sai Alba. Sai is with PilieroMazza, and I will have him tell us a little bit about his background and his company. So Sai, over to you to introduce yourself, please.
Thanks, Rena. Yeah, I'm Sai Alba. I'm a partner in PilieroMazza's government contracts group. I've been doing exclusively government contracting law basically since I started. I don't know when that was, 16 or so years ago. Before that, I worked in the government for a little bit, State Department, and so I have a kind of experience on both sides, dealing with a whole range of government contract issues. And obviously, as a large amount of our client base are small to mid-sized companies, this is a major, STARS 3 is a major issue for them. And so I'm happy to be here and walk through all of this. PilieroMazza generally does work for mainly small to mid-sized federal contractors in various spaces. Government contracts has been our core practice group, but we also do labor and employment, general litigation, and we have a large corporate practice with M&A and general corporate matters as well.
Thank you, Sai. I'll quickly introduce myself. I'm your host and moderator. My name is Rena Bhatia. I'm the CEO of ProposalHelper. And for outside of DC metro area, those of you who know bid execs, I've been in this industry for over 25 years. Started ProposalHelper about 10 years ago. We're a little over 10 years old now. I have personally worked on all flavors of STARS from the beginning, and our team has also worked on previous iterations of STARS. A little bit different this time, but the core foundation is there. We do specialize in IDIQs, although that is not just a specific area of focus for us. I bring experience working with large and small businesses, and so does our entire team. I'll put up our slide on ProposalHelper, but I am going to ask our Vice President to introduce himself. So Dr. Tyre, if you will please introduce yourself to the team today, or the participants today.
Most definitely, thanks, Rena. As Rena mentioned, I'm Dr. Tyre, retired Marine, worked Senior Vice President of Operations for a couple companies. I worked collaborative research with a company in the emerging technologies environment, with doing a lot of collaborative research with universities. I am the Vice President of U.S. Operations and Delivery Solutions for ProposalHelper. So if anybody's getting support or proposals through ProposalHelper, then I have probably spoken to them at one point or another. We've got an entire team behind us that supports, but I'm kind of keep the team together and focused in the right direction. Thanks, Rena.
Thank you. I just want to have a quick disclaimer here that this webinar is for informational purposes only. We're not providing any legal opinions or legal advice during this conversation. If anyone is recording this meeting for themselves, please know that you do not distribute this. We will distribute this recording to all participants and also on the web. Our recording will be available. But again, this is only for informational purpose. And as I mentioned, we are recording this webinar. The most common question I get in the Q&As is, is this being recorded, and will the recording be available? So we just want to put that out there. Yes, it is being recorded. The Q&A lines are open. We already have some early questions coming in, and we encourage that. We will answer questions at the end of the webinar. So I will moderate those and watch for your questions and get them answered as best as we can. We encourage you to follow us on LinkedIn. We do announce various IDIQ related webinars. And for those of you who are interested in knowing what IDIQs are coming up, please watch out for that information by following us on LinkedIn. With that, we'll get into the meat of all of this and let the two speakers, or all three of us, answer your questions. I know there are some burning issues that everyone wants to learn about. Our topics of discussion are Final RFP, what changed since STARS 2 and even since the draft. As we all know, that that notice that came out on Beta SAM, don't work, the Final RFP is going to change. Well, what did they really change in that? We'll talk a little bit about that. Majority of the time, we will talk about teaming, the various ways you can team. Your JV questions, teaming questions will be answered. And then we'll talk a little bit about past performance and proposal pitfalls, how to avoid them, some of the common mistakes. So with that, let me bring in Dr. Tyrer to tell us a little bit about the RFP and the background. Dr. Tyrer, over to you.
Thanks, Raina. This is STARS 3, and if you're looking at the slide, this is a high-level overview of STARS 3 as a whole. STARS 3 is the Streamlined Technology Application Resource for Services 3. It is the third iteration of STARS, and we're probably going to touch on the bottom box here in a minute. There are a lot of incumbents on STARS 2. They are not grandfathered into STARS 3. STARS 3 starts with a clean slate, and even those that had STARS 2 must recompete and receive an award to bid on task orders at STARS 3. The parent agency is GSA. The end user can be any government agency at the task order level. This is a contract vehicle, so GSA is looking for all of the awardees to market the contract vehicle. Sounds like they want you to do their work for them. However, it is in your best interest. The better you can market it, the more task orders that will be driven to the contract vehicle, the more opportunities you have to bid on task orders. This is a set aside. It is an SBA certified 8A. They do caveat that and say that they may subcategorize specific socioeconomic groups underneath the 8A umbrella. So you may see a task order come out that is a hub zone set aside or a service disabled veteran owned set aside. That will not be uncommon. It is a government-wide acquisition contract, or a GWAC, multiple award IDIQ. The task orders can take on many different flavors to include hybrids, but the basis is firm fixed price, incentive, time and material, labor hours. The lead NAC for this one is 541512. This is kind of a major change between 2 and 3, as well as between the draft and the final solicitation. The NACs that you're looking at on the slide in the draft all align to a specific functional area. That is no longer the case, nor will STARS 3 be limited just to these NAC codes. STARS 3 is IT services and almost anything and everything that's IT services related. I know common math says that the numbers for period performance say 8. I would say this is a 13-year contract, and I'll tell you why I say that. It's got a base of 5 years. It has got 1 3-year option period. You may receive a task order the very last day of that 3-year option period, and that task order can carry you 5 years out. Place of performance, it can be CONUS or OCONUS based at the task order level. The OCONUS becomes important here because that is one of the sub areas that you can request they evaluate you for to receive an award to bid on task orders that are OCONUS. We've kind of already touched on the next one. This is the next iteration of STARS. There are many incumbents. However, it's a clean slate for STARS 3. The opportunity value went up from 20 billion to 50 billion when it came out in the final draft, or the final stage. There is a minimum guarantee of $250. That will be honored when you earn your first $250 on your first task order. If you're not familiar with IDIQs that require a CAF or a contract access fee, the fee is there on the slide. This is not important at the STARS 3 IDIQ proposal level. It is very important to you and your pricing people when you start bidding on task orders, because the GSA is going to want those funds. The validity, we recommend 120 days. The purpose for that is once you hit submit, that gives the government 120 days to do their evaluation and to adjudicate any protests that might come out on this one. The task orders may come out at a secret or as high as a TSSCI SAP level. They did clarify in the final solicitation that you are not required to have any facility clearance to receive an award on STARS 3. What it does is if you don't have a facility clearance, it will just limit the task orders that you can bid on that do require facility clearance. But you are not required to have one to bid on STARS 3 or to receive an award on STARS 3. SBA certified 8As are eligible. There is no requirement to hold a GSE contract to submit a proposal and receive an award on STARS 3. You must be a legal entity, and I'm sure Sai is going to talk on this one quite a bit more, but I'll open it up with your CTA that people understand with GSA, where each member has an equal voice, is not one of the options for STARS 3. To them, a CTA is either a prime sub relationship or it is a joint venture.
Great, thank you. And again, I want to reiterate the third bullet here because there is some misinformation. We got early questions on this as well, that are you required to have a GSA contract to bid on GSA STARS? Absolutely not. There is no correlation between the two. This is a separate contract, so please don't get confused by that. Sai, did you want to add anything on this bullet, or should we first talk about the proposal and then when we get to teaming, we'll touch on CTA related stuff?
Yeah, I can touch on CTAs when we get there.
Okay, sounds good. Dr. Tyre, I'm going to ask you to just chime in and talk about any major changes that you want to focus on with this RFP, and I can chime in as well.
Most definitely. And if people saw the draft RFP and rack and stack it up against the final RFP, the major change is that you are no longer required to pick and choose which of the 6 functional areas you want to submit against. You are no longer required to get 2 or 3 relevant experience projects to link to each one of those functional areas. A matter of fact, you are only authorized to submit 2 relevant experience projects, which are called reps. For the entire submission for STARS 3, those 2 reps must align to their PWS requirements, which is in Charlie point 1.2 in the solicitation. Very general. It basically says anything and everything IT related, and your 2 reps must align to the 2 sub areas. One of those is emerging technologies, and the other sub area is OCONUS. They give us a template to submit the reps on. You are very limited in the narrative that you can write for each rep. It can be no longer than 2 pages. About a page and a half to a page and 3/4 of that is taken up with contract information from the past performance you're using to validate your rep. And with each rep, you're also required to submit the FPDS report, and you can submit a fully executed front page of your contract along with the statement of work or performance work statement that goes with that. And then your entire past performance for this is either a past performance survey or a CPAR. All of that is wrapped in for each one of the 2 reps, and you can submit up to 2 reps, or you must submit 2 reps, no more, no less. So those are the major changes, Rena.
Thank you. And I think you answered about half the questions that came in early. Is are we allowed only 2 reps? Can we submit more, or can we submit less? So as you just mentioned, it's exactly 2 reps, no less, no more. Is that correct?
That is correct, and those 2 reps must align to, they did list 6 functional areas, not functional areas. They identified 6 IT service areas in Charlie .1.2, but it's very general, and it just says that those are examples. So if you've got past experience in information technology to any perspective, I would probably submit for STARS 3. That would align to the requirements to receive an overall award for STARS 3. And then if you have work that is emerging technology, there's a box in the rep template to where you fill out what type of technology it was. And when you fill out that box, you're asking them to evaluate you underneath sub area 1. And they've got a second box that's OCONUS. If you've done OCONUS work on those contracts you're using for the reps, then you fill out that box, and that is doing the same thing. It's asking them to evaluate you on sub area 2.
Great. Sai, did you want to chime in here on proposal related, RFP related specifics?
Sure, yeah, and so there's a few things I'm going to talk about, and the issue of how many of the reps you can submit, I think there's confusion because the RFP says different things in different places. I'd hope they get some clarification to what we just said, because yeah, in section L17 it says you have to demonstrate it by submitting 2, and other places it says no less than or at least something to that effect. So I think there's been some confusion on that, so hopefully that's clarified. What I will say as to other issues that I think are of general importance is the impact of 8A graduation. There's been a lot of questions on that, and I think the RFP and the Q&A is pretty clear that they're considering graduation no longer to be an off-ramp, but they are saying if you graduate, then you are no longer eligible for the option. So it's a 5-year base, like we just talked about, 5-year base and then 1 3-year option. If you graduate within that first 5 years, you will not be awarded the option. That is not consistent with SBA's rules. Generally speaking, under SBA's rules, if the options are priced, you can receive them even after graduation under the 8A rules. And here, I think arguably, I would say every year is priced, the entirety of it's actually 13.5 years, because you only submit your first year of pricing and the rest of the pricing is automatically determined using the price index. So I think there's a good argument that under SBA rules, every year of this contract, all 13 and a half, or essentially infinite actually, would automatically be priced because your price is just going to increase automatically under the price index. But is someone going to protest that? We'll have to see. I just want to make it clear that that is not what the RFP says. The RFP does not say you're automatically allowed to continue performance of options just because they're priced. It says you will not be awarded an option. Also, the idea of receiving sole source awards after graduation, this in the RFP is consistent with SBA's rules, which basically says you need to be an eligible 8A participant at time of bid and award of a sole source. They've made it consistent here, whereas under STARS 2, a lot of people that I've heard of have been receiving sole source awards even after graduation under STARS 2, because the idea was, or the ordering agencies at least thought, well, if you're still there, you're still eligible. So it's not exactly accurate. Also, when it comes to CMMC, just to be clear, there's been a lot of questions on that too, that CMMC certification is not required to bid. I've had that question come up. The fact of the matter is CMMC is not even ready yet. It hasn't really been instituted, so there'd be no way for you to even get certified. However, you do have to show that you're preparing and participating in acquiring CMMC certification. Not exactly clear what that means, but they give you some examples in the RFP of things that you should be doing, that you should be paying attention to, that you should be determining whether or not you're, what steps you're going to take in order to get CMMC certified, that you're paying attention to it. After award, GSA here, they might be auditing the steps that you're taking to get CMC certified, so you can't just sit there and rest on your laurels. It's also possible that task orders require CMMC certification, and that the option period might require at least level 1 certification. So if you are looking to keep this through the option years, or your joint venture is looking to keep it through the option years, you're going to have to look at getting CMMC certified and keeping that running so that you have it as soon as it's available, or at least within that first 5-year period. Lastly, when it comes to SCRM issues, it's pass-fail. And so you're going to have to identify how you're going to identify, manage, and mitigate supply chain risk. You got to list any certifications you have, whether it's CMMC later or ISO and whatnot now. Address how any like hardware, software, firmware components and systems are going to be protected from component substitution, functionality alteration, malware insertion, those sorts of things. And making sure that you're doing that and you're stating all of this from the perspective of the joint venture, because the RFP is also clear that if you're in a joint venture, you need to state things as it's the joint venture, even though it's unpopulated, even though it's going to be separate parties. To the extent something is applicable to each of the parties individually, you're going to have to present a united front, and all of the members are going to have to agree on what the rules of engagement are for the various levels, whether it's SCRM or otherwise. Another quick thing that we kind of touched on earlier is the idea, and we get questions about it, about clearances and facility clearances, and whether the JV can have a facility clearance. That is not a requirement for the master contract. But there is some GAO case law out there, and this might matter more at the order level, that suggests if all members of the joint venture have the facility clearance required, that the joint venture, you could make the argument the joint venture should have that as well, so automatically for evaluation purposes, but that is not DCSA's current view. DCSA believes the JV has to have its own clearance, even in an unpopulated situation. SBA is working on rules right now and talking with DCMA to streamline that and make it easier, or potentially to codify the idea that if the members have it, the JV has it. But currently, even though you can arguably make an argument about that because this GAO case law, DCMA is of the opinion, DCSA is of the opinion that you need to have it at the JV level. So just be aware of that.
So I said I would take questions at the end, but since it's relevant to what we're discussing, a repeated question that's coming in is, do the reps have to be only from the prime, or can they be all from the sub? No reps from the prime, only from the sub. I don't know if Troy or Sai, either one of you have that answer in front of you, but that is a question that we want to answer at some point during this conversation. We also want to point out that there is a requirement for NAICS code. So the FPDS must show a relevant NAICS code for the REPs, for the reps. Dr. Tyre, I don't know if you want to address that, if you have more information specific to how the NAICS codes apply, because if your FPDS does not back up the NAICS codes, that will not be a relevant rep.
That would be my assumption, Rena. However, they left that open and said that those were an example and not all inclusive. So I think if you have an IT rep, you might have a dog in the fight. As far as the reps can come from a subcontractor. You just have to have the subcontractor's letter of commitment. I would recommend against having all reps come from a subcontractor, just because that does not show a strength of the prime.
Right, that would be some of the later topics that we were going to discuss, your best practices, pitfalls in putting a winning proposal. Sai, any advice on the reps coming from subcontractors?
I will say I totally agree with what we just said. When it comes to a joint venture, and arguably in this context, because the way the RFP is written, it would apply to the subcontractor question as well. I did just get SBA to agree with us on a protest and cause the agency to take corrective action in a different procurement, where all of the experience came from the mentor entity, not the managing member. And SBA agreed with us that the regulation allows for that. That's not a public opinion because the agency took corrective action, but I have a letter from SBA that they filed in the GAO case supporting that analysis. So I don't think it's without risk, but just FYI, there is some precedent, at least in the JV context, that might be analogous here, given the way the RFP is written for subcontractors, but I think it's still risky, as we just said.
All right. Well, we'll continue and move on into what everybody has been waiting for. So Sai, the stage is now yours, and I'll continue to moderate questions here that are relevant to this topic of discussion.
So as we kind of talked about already with CTAs and the whole concept of a GSA CTA, that does not apply here, right? So don't get confused about CTAs. I know with CIOSP4 and some of the other vehicles, there was a lot of confusion about that nomenclature. I, for one, am appreciative that they did not use the term CTA or start referencing FAR 9601, 6011, 6012. That just creates confusion. And so here with STARS 3, they just stuck with this traditional prime sub and joint ventures, which frankly is the same thing as FAR 9601, 1 and 2, but it's much less confusing when you phrase it this way. So when you're talking about prime contractor, subcontractor relationships, it's also important to note that in this RFP, they're talking about the prime contractor, subcontractor role in the context of just what is allowed to be evaluated and what can go in your proposal, not how you're going to actually perform the work. And the reason why that's important is because it says that all proposed subcontractors must be 8A companies, and they all have to be small under the applicable NAICS code. So if you're thinking you're going to propose a subcontractor that is a large business, you can certainly use them in the performance of the work, but you can't use them as a proposed subcontractor here. You can only use 8A firms as proposed subcontractors. I still disagree. This was in the draft RFP too. They just clarified what they meant is that for proposal purposes that they're limiting it. I think this is likely unduly restrictive of competition and probably a violation and subject to protest. But at the same time, if people are looking at good teams with a number of 8As coming together and no one protests, no one protests. But it's an odd requirement, but it is a requirement. And unless it's challenged or changed prior to the submission of proposals, you have to abide by it, because you can't lose the procurement and then decide to protest it later. It'll be untimely and it won't work. So just realize that when you're putting your teams together for subcontracting purposes specifically. As we said, past performance and experience is allowed for all subs. And I think that ties together with this requirement that all subs be 8A firms, small 8A companies, because I think GSA is confusing the concept of a similarly situated subcontractor for purposes of meeting the limitation on subcontracting rules, and how you can use subcontractors more broadly for purposes of past performance, experience, and evaluation under the FAR. So I think they're merging those two concepts. Maybe they know exactly what they're doing and they're not confused. They did it on purpose. That's possible. But it seems to me like they're conflating those two concepts. But as we already said as well, when you're talking about your 8A subcontractors here, you need letters of commitment. You need a letter authorizing the use of the subcontractor's past performance, and the subcontractors have to state a commitment to support the prime in all task orders. Does that mean that all of these proposed 8A subcontractors have to be involved in every task order? Not necessarily, but they have to be promising or committing to support you in all of the task orders that you bid on. So I think the idea is that everybody is looking to probably work together, or at least some way have some involvement, even if it's proposal support. And I think what GSA is getting at here is they don't want a bunch of people putting teams together for purposes of winning the award, and then having the government GSA rely upon that team as a whole and what that team brings to the table. And then later, when the task orders come out, having only one of the members that's on the supposed proposed team, or having only the prime start going after everything and losing or not bringing the qualifications to the table that they thought they were evaluating. So they seem to be getting more serious about that in these requirements. Another thing of note when you're dealing with this teaming and prime sub is that a subcontractor or prime can submit on multiple teams. There's nothing that says you can't be on a team as a prime over here and then be on as a sub over on a different team, or be a sub on a bunch of teams. You can't be a prime on multiple teams, but you could be a sub, a prime on one, a sub on other, or a sub on multiple, at least under the terms of the RFP. I mean, obviously there's confidentiality concerns that might exist with your teammates, but that's a private matter. Then when it comes to joint ventures, the thing with the joint ventures that does explicitly state you have to follow the joint venture rules, the SBA rules. So you got to make sure that everything listed in 13 CFR 124.513C is included in your JV agreement. That JV agreement has to be submitted with the offer. So presumably it's going to be checked. Because this is an 8A procurement, it also has to be approved by SBA. So if you are missing certain components, I've seen it happen with large IDIQ, like best in class vehicle awards, where a company lost it because they missed one of the bullets in 124.513C. So you got to make sure everything's in there. I wouldn't mess with the language too much. I would just stick it straight in your agreement as it exists in the regulation, so that it's very easy for SBA to go down the regulation, to look at your JV agreement and check all the boxes. I wouldn't get too fancy with that. Everyone should also know that there's been a new case that came out about 4 weeks ago now at the Office of Hearings and Appeals at SBA, which stated that the managing member has to have control over when to submit bids for the joint venture. It cannot be a unanimous consent provision. There's some insinuation in that case that the other, what they call negative control restrictions, meaning veto rights or unanimous consent provisions that apply to a small business generally, might be applicable to joint ventures. Those rules are not found in law or regulation. They're based in case law. So when you're putting your joint venture together, if you have unanimous consent provisions in there, or if you're creating a management committee that has control over various things, and non-8A members of the joint venture have either veto rights or control through unanimous consent, you're going to want to make sure you check all of those. Again, it's a body of case law, so it's not exactly easy there's no checklist. But to talk to someone who knows what they're doing and have someone walk through the joint venture agreement to make sure it's okay, or to at least advise you as to the level of risk you're taking. I know a lot of people say, look, I'm not willing to let the managing member have complete control over certain items. And if you're not telling me it's absolutely prohibited and there's a case on point, I'm willing to take the risk. That's fine. As long as you know that there is some potential risk and you're going in eyes open. The JV agreement itself also has to identify all members with signatory authority to sign contracts and other documents on behalf of the joint venture. That is not an SBA requirement. That is an RFP requirement. But that means it's nonetheless a critical requirement for purposes of this bid. Otherwise, your joint venture agreement, when it's getting reviewed by GSA, not necessarily SBA, because again, it's not an SBA requirement, when it's being reviewed by GSA, could be rejected. So there's multiple levels of review here to make sure it's compliant with the RFP. And then when it goes to SBA, because it's an 8A contract, the overall award, and it has to be approved by SBA and accepted into the 8A program. When you're dealing with experience and past performance, all member experience and past performance is allowed. So if you're looking to work with a large business and you need the large business's support on this, they're going to have to be your mentor. Otherwise, all members of the joint venture have to be small under the NAICS code in order to avoid affiliation, but they do not all have to be 8A companies. So if you're looking to rely upon the past performance and experience of non-8A firms, given what we just talked about with subs, you're going to have to form a joint venture and make them all members of the joint venture to avoid the problem of only being able to propose 8A subcontractors. That's also an important issue, at least in the way the RFP is currently drafted. Again, I think there's some bid protest risk to that position that the agency is currently taking and what's in the RFP, but as it's written, that's the way it is and exists today. When you look at the mentor-protege JV rules, there's also a somewhat curious statement in here, and it says, quote, only 8A mentor-protege arrangements will be considered for award. There's been internal discussion at our firm about, well, what does that mean? Are they trying to say mentor-protege arrangements with 8A companies? Because that's obvious. This is an 8A contract. Or are they saying literally 8A mentor-protege arrangements? Because 8A mentor-protege arrangements are a particular type. There are two mentor-protege programs, not including DoD. There's the mentor-protege program, the all-small mentor-protege program, and then there's the 8A mentor-protege program. They still exist as of today. They will be merged at some point. It might be even as soon as the fall. When SBA puts out its new regulations, the 8A program might go, 8A mentor-protege program, rather, not the entire 8A program, might go away. And it'll be combined with the all-small, and we'll only have one mentor-protege program under SBA to deal with. But as of right now, there are two. And the statement in this RFP is rather confusing as to whether or not they really mean the restriction to be only that 8A mentor-protege arrangements under the 8A mentor-protege program are accepted for award. So that's, I think, another question that needs to be answered. And my understanding is some of our clients have already asked that. Also, you need to submit proof of SBA approval of the mentor-protege arrangement. So that's just kind of consistent with SBA rules already say for the mentor-protege arrangement to be effective, it has to be approved by SBA prior to submission of proposals. Currently, SBA is taking 105 days is what they say their average is to get the mentor-protege approved. However, I have seen them move much faster in the past week or two. So that's good. I think they've taken maybe a month, although where we are currently, that's still not enough time to get approval done if you haven't submitted yet in time for proposal submission. Although I will say, I think the deadline is probably going to get extended on this, but we'll wait and see. Additionally, you have to submit the actual approved mentor-protege agreement with the offer. Again, they want to make sure you have it and they want proof that you have it. Another critical thing that people need to know, and this might be one of the most extreme critical things, is that we've now heard as of yesterday, 2 days ago maybe, from SBA that, and this is not something that's in the RFP, that SBA will not accept a contract into the 8A program if the 8A company itself has won as a prime contractor and it is the managing member of a joint venture. SBA will not accept both of those contracts into the 8A program. The reason is that 13 CFR 124.513 specifically states that a joint venture agreement is permissible only where the 8A concern lacks the necessary capacity to perform the contract on its own. So SBA is now taken the position, and this is not published as far as I know, they've taken the position that if the 8A company itself independently wins the contract and it's the managing member of a joint venture, then that automatically, that's also been awarded a contract, that automatically shows that the 8A itself did have the capability to perform because they won the contract. As such, the joint venture where that 8A is the managing member was not necessary, and they will not accept the award into the 8A program. As I'm sure that everybody understands, that means that all of the members that were in that joint venture, if they were only in that joint venture with that 8A company, they are now left out in the cold and they do not have a STARS 3 award, because it doesn't matter if GSA awards you the contract. The underlying or umbrella master contract is an 8A award, and therefore it has to be accepted into the 8A program by SBA. Again, this is not something that is stated in the RFP. And it's something that SBA has said in response to some questions that we asked on behalf of a client. So this is certainly a risk factor. I think you might be able to make the argument that if you bid as an 8A contractor and you're not going, or you don't win all the sub areas, you're not going after, or you don't win all the sub areas, and your joint venture does win some of the other sub areas, either the emerging technology or OCONUS, then you could make the argument that no, our joint venture won a different type of contract. The 8A, let's say I'm the 8A, I, as a prime, only won the standard contract, whereas my joint venture won the OCONUS sub area, right? And I, as the 8A, didn't have the capacity to win that OCONUS piece. And the government isn't awarding just the OCONUS piece or just the emerging technology piece. You have to get the master contract and one of those. So I think there's an argument to be made there at the SBA level that in that sort of circumstance, that you would be allowed to maintain both of those awards. Again, this is assuming that SBA doesn't change their mind. The problem with this issue is it's not a GSA issue. It is an SBA issue, and it is also not something that SBA reviews prior to award, especially in certain district offices like here in the District of Columbia. SBA is so backed up that they do not even review joint venture agreements for approval, generally speaking, until it is already up for award. So this is something that you wouldn't necessarily know until you got your, hey, congratulations, you've been awarded, and your JV got the same letter. Then you go to SBA and you say, hey, where's my JV approval? And they say, wait a minute, you won an award and so did your JV. We're not going to give you an approval of your joint venture agreement. So I think it's important to get out in front of this and plan your teams accordingly, or sort of raise a ruckus, if you will, with SBA. I mean, we are already working to talk to SBA about what this really meant and if this is going to actually happen. But it's an important factor for people to know about. In addition to that, in the same correspondence, SBA said that they will not accept into the 8A program awards from multiple joint ventures. We believe that what was meant by that is multiple joint ventures with the same managing venturer. So if you are a prime in one team and you're the managing venturer on 2 or 3 or 4, whatever joint ventures, all of those joint ventures, if you win as the prime, every joint venture you're a managing member of rather, is at risk of not being accepted into the 8A program. Or if you don't bid at all as a prime, but you bid as the managing venture on multiple JVs, you're also at risk of losing the contract after winning, because SBA might not accept it into the 8A program, at least of what they've currently told us. Obviously, this needs to be cleared up, and like I said, we're working with it, but it's something that everyone should be aware of because it's a major potential issue.
That is a lot to digest. Yeah, so let's move on to experience and past performance. We'll start with you, Sai, and then Dr. Tyre, if you want to jump in, feel free to do that.
Yeah, so I think we kind of talked about a lot of this, but you have to, for experience, you have to use the J7 form the attachment J7 form to provide the verification. You have to fill it out perfectly. It's pretty clear from the terms of the RFP that they are really enforcing kind of the logistics of this, or making sure that people are dotting their I's and crossing their T's. And if you don't fill out the form exactly, like, it even references literally checking the proper box in certain cases. If that box is not checked, it's thrown out and you will lose the procurement. So it needs to be really done accurately. Yeah, as I noted, there's some places in the RFP that say you have to submit at least 2 relevant experience projects. One has to be emerging technology, but then in section L, it says you have to submit 2, which makes it seem like it's just those 2. Whereas, so it's not exactly clear. One of which, though, has to be emerging technology. So if you're submitting 2, with 1 being emerging technology, you should be in good shape. Each of the REP, the reps have to be for $100,000 or more. It can be from a federal, state, local, or commercial contract, which is good. I mean, they're looking to allow different parties to come in here and bid to expand the pool. It cannot be for an IDIQ or a BPA, but it can be for underlying orders. So they just mean, if you just want an IDIQ and have no orders under it, you can't submit that. Or if you just want a BPA and have never gotten a purchase order under that BPA, you can't just submit the BPA as your rep. If the work is ongoing for whatever it is that you're submitting for, it has to have been ongoing for at least a year. 1 year of completed work under your belt prior to the proposal due date. That's the date that it's calculated from. If it's a completed project, it has to be completed no more than 5 years prior to the proposal due date. If it's the day, if you completed it 5 years in 1 day, you can't use it. And keep track of that, especially if the proposal deadline gets extended. These dates are going to be extended. So you could have experience today that will not be, if they extend the proposal period a month or 2, that won't be relevant anymore, and you're going to have to switch horses and midstream. You must demonstrate at least satisfactory for all past performance. And I'll get to past performance in a second, but you have to submit past performance for every rep that you submit for the experience factor. And I raised it here because it doesn't, I don't understand how saying you have to have at least satisfactory tracks with a section in past performance that allows you to submit a 1-page statement explaining negative past performance. So that could just be for the text perhaps, but we'll get to that in a second. And so the key issue I see for experience is really making sure that you're following the J7 form to the letter, and that you are very, very careful with how you're filling that out. Otherwise, you're going to risk proposal rejection.
So, Sai, I'm going to interject here in the interest of time. A very common question that's coming in is, can one entity, an 8A, provide their past performance use it for themselves and submit it as on multiple teams? Can the same past performance show up on other team members' proposals?
Yeah, I did not see any restriction on that.
Right. So an 8A can be a prime and an 8A can be a sub on multiple 8A other 8A prime bids. And I'm not sure why, but I presume you're increasing your chances of getting on the stars 3, but you can use the same past performance, right?
Right. The teams could take advantage of your past performance if they wanted to, or your experience, because it's really, you're submitting an experience example, and then the past performance has to track, we'll get the past performance in a second. It has to track whatever experience submittals you made. So you can't submit one project for experience and then a different past performance reference. They have to be the same.
And since we're gonna get to past performance, I'm sorry, just one more question here because a lot of the same questions coming in. If an entity has been a subcontractor to a large prime, what is that experience considered? Is that a commercial past experience, or is that or Do they have to get PPQ from the prime, or do they get PPQ from the entity, the agency that they are a sub to? I would posit that their contract is with the prime, but what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, it has to come from someone within the agency that is like managerial and has cognizance over the project. So I think the examples they gave are like a VP inside the entity.
Okay, so that the PPQ is being filled out not by the prime, but by the agency or a person within the agency that has oversight over the subcontractor?
It would be from the person within if it's commercial project, it's someone with it that you had something with Walmart or something. It would be this person with like the VP at Walmart who had responsibility and has knowledge of the project. Whereas if it's a subcontract you had with the prime, I think it would be the individual who has knowledge of the project within the prime.
Right.
So for past performance, it's linked inextricably to the experience submission, so to the reps that you submit. So you have to submit a reference, a past performance reference, for every experience reference submitted. If you have a CPARS, whether it's interim or final, you must use it. You cannot use the J8 attachment, basically PPQ. If you have a CPARS, you're supposed to use the CPAR reference itself. If you do not have a CPARS, then you have to use the J8 attachment. You can't just come up with your own document. Again, this goes to the idea that I think they're really trying to make sure that you are detail oriented and you're following the instructions to the letter. Otherwise, they're going to remove you. Another thing of note is that if you're using the J8 attachment because you don't have a CPAR, you are responsible for getting them signed and returned to you. If the government official refuses to sign it, or the other individual, like we talked about, if it's a commercial project, refuses to sign it, there's some bad case law out there that suggests you need to bend over backwards, get on an airplane, even now in COVID, right? Do whatever, get out there, make sure that this person is doing it. Because if they don't do it, you got to get another one. So, maybe prepare your proposal. I would tell people is to get a bunch of these ready or something if you don't think, or if someone's giving you a hard time, because you are responsible for making it work, and it all has to be submitted with the proposal. So you need to have it back and in the correct format before your proposal goes in. There's also a section on here that says, again, this is what I was referring to earlier, for negative past performance, you can submit a one-page narrative explaining why and the sort of steps that you corrected and sort of writing a good story, if you will, but it's only one-page story as to maybe why you didn't get the best past performance ratings, or if the narrative makes it look bad, you can explain it. So I think the best way to marry this allowance with the requirement above that you need satisfactory on everything is, let's say you get satisfactory on all your past performance references in CPARS, but the narrative isn't that great, or narrative makes you look a little bad and you want to explain it. You have one page to do that. And I would say if you have something that's negative but is like dead on from an experience standpoint and you really need to use it, this is where I think they're trying to suggest you should use the best experience you have, even if you have to explain it.
Okay.
I think that covers the main pieces, I think, of past performance.
Right. And just in terms of what you said earlier, there are some questions about privity or not privity. SBA's determination on that the 8A would have been able to qualify on its own, and therefore the JV was unnecessary. There are a couple of questions around that says, how do you justify to the SBA that you wouldn't have qualified on your own? There is not a narrative to be written around that. And as you clarified, this is not an SBA's mandate put in writing anywhere. This is something PilieroMazza experienced as part of you working with another client. Can you just talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, this was just where a client, we prepared some questions for a client, sent it to SBA, 4 stars 3, and got a response back that said what I said earlier. And so as far as what can you do to try to get out in front of it, or be prepared when SBA looks at it, there isn't, the only thing where this is stated is that one line I read from 13 CFR 124.513 A2. And so because of that, there is no real checklist or guidance, or this is how SBA determines whether or not it was the JV was superfluous. It's more, I think what they're saying is if you've won the award here and you won as a JV and independently, then they're presuming that the JV wasn't necessary. And that's where my sort of conjecture was that the way to get around that, and just an example that I had already thought of, is if the JV won under some task area that you didn't win independently, then in that context, you could give SBA a reason to say, well, wait a minute, SBA, you're missing the fact that our JV has all the tasks, all the subtasks, and I don't have any. So it was necessary, and that gives us broader scope in the award. So both the award to me and to the JV would be appropriate.
But that's not a narrative to be written in proposal. That is when you cross that bridge, when it happens, and that's why we need people like Sai to be on our side, to be able to help you through it. So just to make it clear, there's no place in the proposal for you to be talking about that. And again, that goes to that question, can an 8A prime this bid solo, and can you also be a managing partner of a JV? So just remember that if you're forming a JV for this specific purpose, you're the managing partner, you're also bidding as an 8A, you either have to differentiate the two bids, or you risk SBA coming to you and saying, if you're qualified on your own, why approve the JV? Just to be mindful of that. And just to touch on that a little bit, if it is an existing JV, not one that they have formed specifically for stars 3, how does that change the situation with an 8A bidding on its own and also as an established JV?
Yeah, so when we're talking about this, SBA for 8A purposes approves, it's essentially like a new joint venture for every contract, not legally, but from the perspective of SBA's approval process, that's how they look at it. So if you have an existing joint venture agreement, you're going to have to prepare a separate addendum specifically for stars 3. That's a requirement, an SBA requirement. So when you have this separate addendum, SBA is going to look at that addendum and decide to approve it or not. And when, as part of that process, they're also going to look at whether or not they should accept the award into the 8A program. So they have a couple avenues as to whether or not to approve the joint venture or reject it, and then also whether to accept the award to the joint venture into the 8A program. So there's a couple times where SBA can sort of pull this card. And as Rena noted, this is not something that's a GSA issue at all. GSA will, at least in areas like DC, where they don't even look at your JV agreement until after they've heard you're going to be awarded a contract, this is not something you necessarily would come up until after GSA says, congratulations, you won stars 3. Then SBA looks at it and says, no, we're not approving that award. So
right. So
that's why we're trying to clear it up.
Don't get too excited when you get that letter from GSA is what you're saying. Hold on until SBA gives you the blessings.
And hopefully this will be cleared up, or we're trying to say, SBA, what do you mean? You got to be clear and you got to publish something, and we're trying to get that done for everybody's sake.
And we've moved on. I'm going to move into the proposal pitfalls, but I'm going to continue asking questions. In terms of proposal pitfalls, I would say, and Sai, I'll let you chime in here in just a second. From a proposal perspective, expect GSA is, there are going to be hundreds, if not over 1,000 proposals that are going to come in. As with anything, compliance, compliance, compliance. Make sure you know what you're doing, double check, triple check your work before you submit. And you do have to register into a portal. So that takes, and we did it ourselves as Proposal Helper to make sure we know how the process works. It took us about a week to get approved and be able to log in. So please don't think that you're gonna try and register the night before and submit or be available. This thing is going to be available to you to upload your proposal. Register early. That's one of the advice that I would give. And the other is, of course, on compliance. And I will tell you a lessons learned is Adobe PDF. Believe it or not, on one computer, we had one file that we had filled out some boxes. On one computer, we opened up the file. We can see all the check boxes. We opened it up in a different version of Adobe. Half the check boxes, the response was missing. So please make sure you double check your files before submission on multiple versions of Adobe. On multiple versions, or if you have a Mac versus Windows, that can be an issue. Please make sure that you don't assume that those checkboxes are there. Upload it, and once you upload the file, check it again. You should be able to check those files. So that's just from a proposal standpoint. Sai, advice on proposal pitfalls.
Yeah, I think it kind of went through some of the main things. You got to read it and be very careful, because I think a major issue here from just the way the text is written is making sure every little I is dotted and T's are crossed. So if it says you're supposed to do something, or it says fill out the form, get it perfect, right? Have like your teams go through and triple, quadruple check everything. Because if there's something in this RFP section, like it says, you have to check the box, right? If you're going to submit that J8 form and you're going to say, well, this is for emerging technology, you have to check the emerging technology box on the form. If you don't have that box checked, that's an easy way, because they're going to get a ton of proposals. That's an easy way for them to go down their list and say, oh, box wasn't checked, whole proposal's thrown out. It sounds ridiculous, but the law is on the government side. So make sure it's very careful.
And then, there are also a ton of questions on the CMMC, SCRM, especially when it comes to joint ventures. The question is, does each joint venture member submit their own SCRM, or does the joint venture as a combined submit an SCRM? What are your thoughts on that?
So I think my interpretation of the language in the RFP, that when you look at the JV section, it says that everything should be submitted as the joint venture, not as individuals. So when you're putting together anything, including these areas, you need to draft it as if it's the joint venture. And that's what I was saying before. I think what that means, practically speaking, is that every member is going to have to comply or come together and discuss what are we going to do to get CMMC certified when we can, or what are we working towards? What are we going to do from a SCRM perspective? What are we all going to do? And then everyone's going to have to comply with that, I think, is the practical effect of what the RFP requires. But the submission for the proposal is, this is what the JV is going to do.
Okay. All right. Well, I've already gotten into questions, but now we'll officially get into questions. And I've put up the contact information for those of you who I'm sure will want to reach out to Sai. And if there's anything our team can do to help you after this webinar, feel free to reach out to us. But we'll just take about 3 more minutes. I know we're over time already, but I'll take 3 more minutes and ask you a few questions. And one question I think a couple people asked are, does the JV, this seems like a peculiar question, does the JV have to have multiple members, or can it be formed by a single member LLC? And I'm not sure why you would form a JV as a single member LLC, but I'll let you answer that from a legal perspective. Give us some thoughts and information on that side.
Yeah, so you can have a single member LLC, but you know, obviously you wouldn't have other members for purposes of this proposal and submitting like past performance, experience, qualifications, all that kind of stuff. It would just be you. But there's, I think the other potential issue there is the rules say you can form a joint venture with an 8A company and one or more other small businesses. So what you also risk is if this is not a joint venture, it would be considered an affiliate, and the affiliate entity would not, that you own, would basically be your subsidiary. Subsidiaries do not get 8A certification. They cannot adopt the certification. So a single member LLC, I believe, would probably be seen by SBA as being a subsidiary, not a joint venture, and therefore it would not take the 8A status of the member. So I think that's very risky.
Okay. And in another common question that has come in here is, do we have to use the forms that have been provided in the RFP to submit the reps and all the other information? From my perspective, absolutely yes. That's your compliance. Don't try to change those forms or put it in your own format. You're not going to provide that in, it's not the information, or I should say, it's not just the information. They are very much going to look at compliance, that you filled out their forms accurately. So please do not change their formats when submitting the forms. I don't know if Dr.
Reina, this is Troy. I agree 100%. Use their forms, give them what they ask for, make sure that it is complete, it is current, and it is accurate.
Right. Thank you. I was just going to say, I'm not sure if you were still on, but thank you for being available still. And another question that has come in is, can you combine multiple task orders on a single IDIQ to reach that dollar threshold limit? So it's same IDIQ, but you have multiple task orders. Can you use that as one rep? I didn't see any restrictions on that. Thoughts from you, Sai, and then Troy.
I was looking at that. I think it's not entirely clear. I would say it's potentially risky because it talks about no individual REP value will be less than 100,000. The REP, I was looking to see if there's a clear depth. Offerer must demonstrate relevant experience by submitting 2 relevant experience projects. I think the template makes it seem like it has to be a specific, it's like separate order, but I don't know. Do you have another
Troy, do you have a separate interpretation? Can you combine?
No, ma'am. I agree 100% with Sai. I would not risk trying to add up task orders to meet that 100K requirement. My read is it is one relevant experience, so one past performance. And just to caveat real quick, and I'm sorry for dragging on what Sai said about joint ventures, 100% agree. With the exception of the reps and certs, Lima 0.9.5 says that the managing venturer and each joint venture member must submit separate reps and certs. And there's 2 different sets of reps and certs required for this one.
Right. Yeah, I should have said that. That's exactly right. That is the exception. Or the.
And another common question that keeps on coming up is, are the 2 reps with or without the sub areas? Is it 2 reps, 1 with each one for a sub? I mean, if you're also submitting the
Reina,
sub areas, yeah.
Reina, I'll take that one real quick, and then I'm sure Sai's got some inputs as well and some wisdom. You're allowed 2 reps. They're what you would consider a PWS task. There's only one. It is IT services. They do give 6 examples underneath that, and I believe it's Charlie.1.2, but those are not all inclusive. Those reps need to align to that PWS task, and then if you want to or can go after the sub areas, then those 2 reps would have to align to one or both of those sub areas as well, which is emerging technologies and OCOMs.
Okay, so one rep can be extended forward, but it's not 2 reps for the general IT and then 2 additional for the sub areas.
No, ma'am, it's two reps, period.
Okay.
And
So,
I think I should clarify one thing I said earlier. I think I might have confused people when I said you have to submit 2, right? And 1 could be for like emerging technology. That was sort of that was an example. So if you look at L 17.7.1, it says if at least 1 REP submitted reflects performance in any one of the following emerging technologies, the offer will be considered. So if you want to be considered for emerging technology, you have to submit a rep that has that on it. So yeah, I should clarify in what Troy just said.
okay. And I'm going to give you one final question. There are quite a few others. If we haven't answered your question, we'll try to get those. If they're not already in the RFP, then we'll try to get an answer for you. But Sai, one question for you is, will PilieroMazza continue to work with the SBA to get clarification on the JV managing partner issue that you mentioned earlier? What is PilieroMazza doing, and are you going to continue working with that? How will you inform your folks, our participants here, when you hear something?
Yeah, I think we're going to try to work. We're going to work through the general counsel's office at SBA. I already have some questions in. I'm going to speak with them again a little later about what exactly is intended and can they issue some clarification. And I want them to talk to GSA as well. That's some of these issues is why I don't think the proposals are actually going to go in August. I think there's going to be an extension, but obviously not yet. There hasn't been. but with all these sort of lingering issues that I think has to be communicated through GSA, because again, this is an SBA issue that had we not asked the question or frankly had SBA not responded the way they did, they could have done this 6 months from now or a year from now or whenever words happen, and nobody would have been the wiser. Right? Because the requirement in 13 CFR 124.513 is not that black and white as to what it means to have the necessary capacity to perform. And frankly, I've never seen SBA take this position. This is the first time.
Very interesting. So we'll continue to monitor. If you're not subscribed to PilieroMazza's newsletters, they are full of information. Please make sure that you're subscribed to them. Reach out to us. We'll try to get you updates. We have gone significantly over time. Sai, you've been very generous, and Troy, thank you for your time as well, both of you. The contact information is up on screen for those of you who would like to continue to communicate with us. Thank you all for joining. Thank you, Sai, again. Thank you, Troy. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Raina. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Raina. Thanks, everybody.